Hello and welcome to this month's edition of Wavelength. Well, this month's show is going to be a little bit different from ones in the past as we present our recently completed film about non-point source pollution. The program is the culmination of a lot of hard work from many different departments here at LCRA, and I'm confident that you'll find it informative and entertaining. Next month, we'll return with our regular format of Wavelength with lots of news from around the company. And if you have any story ideas or if you just have some comments about Wavelength, please don't hesitate to give us a call at extension 3313. So now let's all watch Pointless Pollution, America's Water Crisis.
Water is the basis of life on our planet. Our bodies are essentially composed of water. We play in the rivers and the lakes on hot summer days, but we depend upon clean water for more than just recreation. Our very survival here on Earth is at stake. I've spent a lot of my life on the water as a sailor. During the 60s and 70s, I reported on America's efforts to clean up our sewage plants and industrial pollution that were poisoning our lakes and rivers. We made great strides, but there's a lot left to do. There is a much larger and more subtle threat to our waterways. It doesn't come from any one source or point, but from everywhere that man inhabits. That's why scientists call it non-point pollution. To preserve the quality of lakes like this in the Texas Hill Country, we've got a lot of work ahead of us. Inevitably, the storm is coming. The storm brings the rain, and the rain falls upon the land. Non-point pollution then begins as every small object in the rain's path is flushed into the rivers and streams. Styrofoam cups and litter from the streets and sidewalks are the most obvious form of this pollution. But with non-point, it's what you can't see being carried away by the water that is the most threatening. Fertilizers and pesticides from our lawns and farms are some of the invisible contaminants. Oil and gasoline residues from streets and parking lots also are carried away into the water system. Soil erosion is perhaps the most common form of non-point, and one that you can see as plumes of suspended dirt particles choke the rivers and lakes. Anytime the land is disturbed by man, it is vulnerable to being washed away. The net effect is a deluge of dirt, trash, and toxic chemicals that produces more pollution than all of the sewage and industrial plants in the nation.
Non-point source pollution is exactly what it says. It's coming from all different kinds of sources. Wherever people are, you'll find non-point source pollution. It's really a people pollution issue.
Well, non-point is actually an abstraction. It's a thing that is not personal. You don't see it. And it's not something that is readily visualized, as would, say, a fire or a flood or somebody dumping sewage. You can see it coming out of a pipe. And therefore, it's not a smoking gun. It's a slow, gradual, insidious thing. And it's very, very difficult to get people to understand that the long-term effect is total threat and despoliation.
Non-point pollution is a little bit like an incurable and deadly disease. It might be fairly easy to prevent, but once you start seeing signs of it, it's horribly expensive to try and cure, and the best results you're going to get are very feeble.
And nationally, it's become probably the most difficult water quality problem that the country has to solve.
Across the nation, the effects of non-point pollution are nowhere more evident than in the Chesapeake Bay. Rivers flow from Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, and Virginia to create this vast estuary. A favorable mixture of fresh water and seawater once made an ideal breeding ground for crabs and oysters. A unique culture of watermen, as they are called on the bay, evolved around the fishing, and these sturdy souls always have valued their independence and freedom. The waterman's way of life, along with the bay itself, is now threatened by the water that runs off the farmland and crowded urban centers of the mid-Atlantic coast. The crabs and oysters have begun to disappear, and the watermen as well. Ed Farley was not born a waterman, but instead adopted their way of life 14 years ago. He sails a skipjack, the traditional boat used on the Chesapeake, but he can no longer support his family harvesting oysters.
The reality now is the oyster industry is in a radical decline, where this past year we dropped down to about 500,000 bushels. And you really can't make it on oysters anymore.
Instead of oystering, Ed now works for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, taking groups of students to see exactly what's killing the bay.
The source of the problem is what human beings are doing on land, and the major population centers are from Richmond and Washington, D.C. north.
The Chesapeake Bay used to be one of the most productive bodies of water. We used to supply the whole world with oysters.
Kate Irving also works for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Since 1966, this nonprofit group has been trying to save the bay. Their best hope may well lie with a new generation that understands we're all responsible for non-point pollution.
You want a nice green lawn, okay?
Oh, fertilizer.
The chem lawn. Okay, chem lawn, yeah. Or green thumb. Or lawn pro. Anything that gets poured right down into the street, you know, the gutters in your street, that goes directly into the bay. How about if you were a farmer and you wanted your corn to grow?
Cow manure.
Yeah, cow manure or some sort of fertilizer is providing nutrients.
Nutrients are food for green plants, but the rapid growth of plants like algae in the water steals oxygen from the fish, crabs, and oysters that once lived here. John Slawakowski is another foundation worker who's trying to save the bay.
So you've got a lot of fertilizers in the water right now causing this algae to grow.
John takes his group of students up the Patuxent River, one of the many that carry pollutants to the bay.
And what is this stuff? Algae, okay? And this is about the worst that I've ever seen it. I've never seen quite so thick a mat of algae as this on the Patuxent, but you know, this is a sign of severe nutrient enrichment.
Most people think that 75 or 50% of all the stuff, the pollution that gets thrown into the bay, will leave. What we're finding, though, is that it's not. It's sinking down to the bottom, and it stays with us.
The waters of the Chesapeake Bay may never truly recover, but public awareness of the problem has increased. Since the bay's problems originate on the land, it's not surprising to find that the Chesapeake Bay Foundation has its own farm as well. The rolling hills of the Claggett Farm drain into the Patuxent and ultimately the bay. The farm has become a testing ground for new methods. Mike Heller is the manager, and his work has earned him the respect of farmers as well as environmentalists.
It hurts the farmer, non-point source pollution. When you're losing your fertilizer and your soils, and that water is running off those fields, it's hurting you. If you can get away from spraying herbicides, it's very expensive to spray herbicides. Some people spend up to $35 an acre. If we can eliminate that cost, that's a huge saving for the farmer. What we're trying to do is take ideas that other people have used, modify them to work in our area, because it's a very regional sort of problem, and you need regional solutions.
There will be no easy solutions for the Chesapeake Bay. Too long, people simply didn't understand what they were doing. Laws have been passed recently in Maryland and Virginia, limiting development in critical shoreline areas. But it may be too late to save the bay. The effects of non-point pollution in America vary as greatly as the land itself. The natural resources of this region are managed by the Tennessee Valley Authority. Dams and electric power are a large part of TVA's work, and they also provide people with a chance to enjoy floating down the river. In northern Alabama, along Bear Creek, TVA spent more than $1 million to create a recreational floatway. After opening the river, TVA discovered it was unsafe for human contact. The water was infected with bacteria, a form of non-point pollution coming from more than 75 livestock operations along Bear Creek.
It was a place to go swimming hole right here.
Hog farmer Dale Baker.
I used it for hogs. I used it for my hogs in here. And this, the hogs would go way back up under this bluff here where it's good and warm in the wintertime and good cool under there in the summertime. Ideal place to raise hogs.
It was perfect except for one fact. Eventually, the waste flowed into Bear Creek.
I was under the impression at the time it went 20 feet down there, 40 or 100 or so, running over the ground, it would clean it up. In fact, I've drunk water not too far down this branch. I didn't know it was polluted.
The solution was to control the waste with modern techniques, but that costs money that most hog farmers don't have. So the Tennessee Valley Authority agreed to share the cost of facilities like this with Dale and the other farmers along the creek. It was a good deal for everybody. Now, with more than 2/3 of the livestock operations already cleaned up, TVA expects to reopen Bear Creek soon, and Dale Baker got a new home for his hogs.
After I get it washed down, everything, all the manure and everything washed through these holes, I take these trip buckets here, they hold about 500 gallons of water, and dump them in here, and that flushes everything out, cleans everything out all the way down through there.
The wastewater is processed in a holding pond rather than Bear Creek.
I was raised right here on this creek, and of course I'm glad it's getting cleaned up because many of the time I've took my children, we floated down it, and I was raised right here on it. It's home to me. So I'm getting two benefits. I'm getting help in the hog operation, and I'm getting help to clean up the creek, which I'm definitely interested in.
Bear Creek is one of the few examples in the nation where non-point pollution has clearly been eliminated. Most non-point problems are not so easy. In eastern Tennessee, TVA faces a permanent disaster. Silt from mining operations upstream virtually has filled in Lake Nolichucky. The dam was built in 1913 to produce electricity. Today, there's not enough water left in the lake to generate power. Bob Johnson is with TVA's environmental quality staff. A visit to the unusable Nolichucky Recreation Area and Dam is an opportunity for Bob to reflect on the mistakes of the past.
Well, if we were smart back when they started the mining up in the watershed, we would have developed some controls so the silt would not have gotten into the stream. But we didn't do that. And over these years, the silt from the mining operation up in the watershed has carried it into the dam, and it's been closed now for about 10, 15 years.
The idle hydroelectric turbines cost the Tennessee Valley Authority more than $1 million a year in lost revenue.
Lakes like this should be lasting thousands and thousands of years. They should not be filling up. Natural sedimentation and eutrophication processes are very long term. It's part of the natural evolution of the planet. This demonstrates what man can do in short order. Maybe if we had a few more examples like Nolichucky Lake, that we could bring people to and show them that if we don't do something, this is exactly what they're going to end up with. We're sort of a crisis-oriented country until something gets big enough and where it starts impacting you as an individual that you really can feel, we don't do a lot about it. Yet this one will catch up with us. I call these sort of biological time bombs that we're dealing with.
In southeastern Minnesota, there's a non-point time bomb that already has exploded. This bomb went off underground when the cumulative effects of fertilizers from the farms contaminated the groundwater with nitrates. In 1986, 2 babies died in neighboring South Dakota because of nitrates in well water.
The nitrate problem was recognized because of the effect it has on infants. And in the first few months of life, the infant is not able to absorb those nitrates into its system as an older child is or as an adult is able to do. So the infants are very susceptible to nitrates. And the problem that was seen is what we call blue baby syndrome. And the babies literally are starved of oxygen. The oxygen is replaced by nitrates, and the infants actually have died. And That was the impetus for some of our early nitrate testing in this region.
Typically, 20–25% of the rural private wells are yielding water that exceeds the drinking water standard for nitrates or for coliform bacteria or for both. Typically, 30–50% of the wells are yielding water that contain detectable quantities of pesticides. So the contamination problem is very widespread, and it's a very pervasive kind of problem.
To buy a home with its own well in Minnesota, you must have the water tested. If the nitrate level is too high, the bank will not loan money for the purchase.
About 10% of all of these transactions are held up or stopped by the water quality test results. This has an enormous impact on the individuals. It affects both the buyer and the seller.
We came back with an 11.1 nitrate reading, which is above legal lending limits, which is 10. So now we're stuck with the situation that we can't sell our house and have anybody buy our house because they can't get any money to buy our house. So we're faced with either staying here until we get annexed into the city of Rochester, or we can sink a new well, which would be $10,000 approximately.
Health officials suspect that the nitrates in the wells of this neighborhood come from fertilizer spread on nearby fields.
People are still clearly putting on 2–3 times as much fertilizers as they need to produce the crops that they're interested in. And a lot of that fertilizer is winding up in the groundwater.
The source of drinking water for about 70% of the nation is found underground in water-bearing layers called aquifers. All of the drinking water in southeastern Minnesota comes from aquifers that are particularly susceptible to contamination. The limestone rock is highly porous and contains cracks and fissures that serve as a direct pipeline from the surface.
We understand what the problems are pretty well. We understand why the system is operating in the way it is operating. A much more difficult question is, what can you do about it?
Someone is doing something about it on a dairy farm near Rolling Stone, Minnesota. Eugene Kalmus was born on this farm, and he has spent a lifetime caring for the land.
What are we farmers here for? We're stewards of the soil. Let's take care of it for our grandchildren, our children, and our grandchildren. And if we can't take care of it, where's the food going to come from in years to come? We're getting more away from chemical fertilizer. We don't use any chemical fertilizer anymore.
You don't?
No. We got enough animal waste to take care of it. And my son, he's more conservation-minded than I am, I think. We put all our corn in the spring without any chemical fertilizer. It's all animal waste.
Eugene is particularly proud of his waste management system. Cow manure is removed from the barn and held in a concrete pit. Twice a year, the waste is spread on the fields and then covered with dirt to retain the nitrates in the waste and keep them from running off into the groundwater.
I kind of think I'm an entrepreneur. I don't know, maybe I ain't, but I like to experiment with things and get things going. You got to experiment with it. You'll never know what the heck is going on. After some more data comes out, we're going to have to cut down on herbicides and pesticides. I still say that that's half the problem. Well, people come off with so much cancer. There's sure been a lot of it around here lately.
Eugene's concern about health and the environment has led him to become a member of the local Water Quality Task Force. 9 counties in southeastern Minnesota have these groups, which help establish regulations to protect the aquifers. The key is local citizen participation.
It then becomes something that they are doing. It becomes their project. They can tailor it to fit their own particular needs. And most importantly, it doesn't come out as something that's imposed on them from somewhere else. It is the people who live and work in the area protecting their own groundwater resource.
Not only is your pesticide and herbicides, fertilizers, important, but so are some of these other issues that are being mentioned.
Chemical storage management.
Animal waste management.
Storage tank management. Yeah.
Just chemical storage.
Solid waste management.
Urban and rural use of chemicals.
Commercial and recreational water uses.
Storage of potential contaminants.
Land management practices.
There's no doubt that the groundwater is threatened by a myriad of non-point sources of pollution. In southeastern Minnesota, it took overwhelming evidence, including the deaths of children, to drive the people to action. In central Texas, the same type of aquifers are found, and the people of Austin rallied in a similar way to protect their water. The Edwards Aquifer feeds Barton Springs, which flows at a constant 68 degrees year-round into a pool. Hundreds of years ago, it was a popular campsite for Indians. Today, Barton Springs is one of the elements that makes Austin one of the most attractive cities in Texas. This little bit of heaven on earth brings a regular crowd of swimmers every morning at sunrise. For many, the springs are a virtual fountain of youth.
Well, I feel that way. I'm 68, and I feel more like I'm 40.
The beauty of Barton Springs in the Texas Hill Country helped to fuel a dramatic increase in development throughout the 1970s and early 80s. Ironically, the growing presence of people on the land began to destroy part of what attracted them to Austin in the first place. It became more common after every heavy rainfall for swimmers to be barred from entering Barton Springs. Non-point pollution was contaminating the water.
I think all of us swim out here were aware of the fact that there seemed to be some danger of it being polluted so badly that, it wouldn't be swimmable unless they blocked it off and chlorinated it. There's some discussion that eventually that would have to be done.
Fearing that they would lose their natural swimming pool, citizens formed two associations to protect Barton Springs. Their efforts led to a comprehensive watershed ordinance for the city of Austin. The law was designed to limit the effect of increasing development on the aquifer, the springs, and the Colorado River, which flows through the city.
The city's environmental ordinances really are an outgrowth of the grassroots support for water quality in Austin. And it's given us the mandate to go ahead and do the things that we've been able to do.
This state-of-the-art filtration pond is one non-point control required in Austin for new development. The runoff from about 8 acres of pavement drains into this pond.
The fact that it's not very beautiful looking just shows that it's working. All of the sediment that's in here has been kept from going into the creeks and eventually into our watershed and down into our water supply.
The murky water and trash that you still see in Town Lake after a storm are graphic evidence of what happens when runoff pollution is not prevented. Austin's watershed ordinance covers only new development and does not require permanent controls for the downtown area of the city. It's extremely expensive to go back and undo the environmental mistakes of the past. A few miles upstream from Austin on the Colorado River, people still have a choice about development and non-point pollution. The clear, clean water of Lake Travis makes it a year-round mecca for swimming, sailing, and water skiing. As Austin exploded with growth during the 70s, more and more people began to build on Lake Travis. Jan Yenawine has been diving in this water for 25 years, and he has seen its quality change as more people occupy the shores.
In the 60s, we saw the lake was extremely clear. It was one of the best lakes in Texas for diving. We had dive schools that came from all over the state and even out of state for their open water classes. During the 70s, we saw the water quality deteriorate because of development and pollution just running in the lake, people not being careful. It clouded so bad that at 30 feet you had lost your visibility.
At the present time, there is no effective regulation or a comprehensive program to protect Lake Travis from non-point contamination. Under these circumstances, a development like this has about the best pollution controls you can expect.
There's obviously no place on that island anymore for water to be absorbed into the shore, and into the ground and filtered and cleaned. If you start having a lot of that development along the shoreline, you're going to get a lot of just plain dirty water passing right over the top of those developments with no filtration at all. You're going to get huge slugs of fertilizer and pesticides and all sorts of things going into the water. They'll turn green, and It just won't be that big, beautiful, clear lake that all of the economy of western Travis County depends on.
Taylor Almond and other lake residents are concerned because a stagnant economy is the only thing now saving Travis from unregulated development. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand the potential for disaster at hand. But Jack Strickland is exactly that. Jack retired from the aerospace industry and now raises orchids in a small Garden of Eden he created near the lake. Jack also founded the Protect Lake Travis Association.
I'm not against developers. I think that development is a natural and desired result of man's drive to have better housing and better living conditions. But it should be done to accommodate the nature and the way we live. And I don't think that man should mess up his environment to the point where he leaves a mess for his children. But the main problem is getting the message out so that people will really understand that they're talking about their own property, their own lives, and the net result, if they want to continue in business and live there for years after, is to take care of it in the present, because the future is going to be nasty if they don't.
If this area gets built out at anything like normal urban density, that lake will be ruined. We have to find ways to both limit the density in terms of impervious cover and the human footprint on the land, and we also have to take a special care during the design process of those new developments.
Prevention is a whole lot easier than trying to make up afterwards. The cleanup of the Hudson River has cost untold millions. I have no idea. And the cleanup of the Chesapeake Bay Basin is going to take billions, if they ever do it.
We have to get out there before the development occurs and design that development so that it does not pollute. Once it's in place, what can you do? Bulldoze it down and say you're going to start again?
Like the waters throughout America, Lake Travis and the Colorado River face a cloudy future unless we prevent non-point contamination. The homeowner and developer in Texas, the hog farmer in Alabama, the dairyman in Minnesota, they have one thing in common. They all pollute the water, usually unintentionally, but the effect is the same. This pointless pollution is a problem that begins with all of us, but also is one that we can solve together. In the end, what we do on the land will determine what kind of water we leave for our children. I'm Walter Cronkite.